to join.
Hey.
Hello there.
Hello.
So what's up?
How is everybody today?
Doing good, doing great.
Doing well.
Ooh. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Okay, we're going to give everybody about 2 more minutes to join, and then we're going to get started. I see a couple more people have joined. Is everybody doing okay?
Yes, I'm doing great. Thank you. How about you?
I am doing great. I am doing great. This is not going to be a quiet class. This class is all about conversation. It is engagement. So I'm going to be looking for everybody to share their experiences out in the field. So just kind of get your thoughts together. Share with everybody what's going on in your world as we go through this class. Unmute. Okay, so this is the Make and Receive Offers class. I am Alisa Rayford. I am, I've been in this market center for almost 3 years. June is the 3rd year for me. I am the lead agent of the Daisy Realty team. I'm a John Maxwell coach. I've been an ALC member, and I am a podcaster for a 2 to 3 minute podcast on Wednesdays called Wise Words Wednesdays. So that's it about me. So let's get started on where we start in this whole making receiving offers process. Let's assume that you've already found a home for your clients and you are about to write that initial offer. I'm going to just kind of full disclosure, I am also a listing agent. I do listings as well. I have recently had a couple of hot listings, and I just want to share some of that experience with you guys as we are having the conversation about making and receive offers. I will tell you, I had a listing that we treated like an open house. There was only 15 minutes that everybody could see it. And we only showed it for one day, and that house had over 80 offers on it. Yes, I said 80, over 80 offers on this particular property. So I want you to think about that when you're submitting your offers, because depending on what the price range is, and it was definitely in the sweet spot, you can have a lot of agents and the other agent could be reviewing a lot of agents. So be patient with the other agent, with the listing agent when you're calling and asking questions, because if they've got a hot property, they're really kind of going through it. And I'm talking about this kind of from my own experiences with full disclosure. So you want to call the agent, ask them, if they've got offers, see how much information you can gain before you're submitting your offer. Do they have multiple offers? I'd like to ask, do you have at least 10? So I know kind of what I'm going up against. And I also like to ask, do you have any cash offers at this time? I heard somebody mention in team meeting about the comments that listing agents are putting in the system. Make sure you're taking the time to read those offers because it has valuable information on there. Some of these properties are only staying on the market for a couple of days. It goes on the market late Friday. They may show it only Saturday, or they may show it only Sunday. That information is being put in the system. That information is being put in the system so that agents know how to, proceed. Don't assume that because there is a time frame in a listing agreement that it is an open house, because it may not be. They're just telling you that these are the restricted hours that is being provided by the seller for you guys to review, for you guys to preview the home. So I really want to stress that, because I think sometimes that information is being missed. So I'm going to reiterate, make sure that you are reading the notes that are in the system. They are providing you with when the home is available. They're also even providing you information on how to submit your offer. Sometimes if it's a designated email address, that email address is there. Those kinds of things are going to make it easy for your offer to be submitted. I will tell you from my own experience, the electronic signing through Dotloop and DocuSign and Remind, those listing agents don't want that. And they're putting that in those comments. And so they're going to ask you to resubmit your offer in the format that they're looking for, just because it's going to be easier to move through the process. It's going to be easier to make sure that your information gets sent over to the seller, depending on how that information is being transferred. So it just makes things a little bit easier. And we want to make it We want to come across to that listing agent when we're making and receive offers as somebody who is going to be easy for them to work with. Anybody have any feedback on that?
Yes, because they're gonna be able to know whether or not you can follow instructions.
Right,
You're gonna be a headache later.
right. And sometimes that listing agent has some influence and sometimes they don't. So we want to make sure, since we typically are not going to know that information, we want to come across as being as easy to work with as possible. Anybody else have any feedback? Anybody else notice anything in the comments of a listing that they want to share?
Hey, this is Jamara. No, I'll comment on that. I had one recently where it spoke to what you just said, basically about making sure you're reading it, because she didn't want, any of those DocuSign things. She said to submit, as one single PDF and all that. So I've definitely seen it so far, and I've just, I just started. So.
And I will add, as much as possible, try to make it in order. Like, don't have an exhibit at the front and then your purchase and sale is, the third kind of attachment in that PDF. Because, the more you look like you're the professional and you know what you're doing, the better that offer comes across. But when you're just hodgepodging it, piecing it together, it's like, well, is this what we're going to be doing the whole time? So, and I mean, things happen, because I had one this weekend where she sent it via dot loop, but dot loop, some of you may or may not know, because maybe you have or have not used it before we retired it from Keller Williams in terms of us using it really primarily. It has the option where you can click a box and it provides a PDF. So at a minimum, if you can't consolidate it into one PDF, at least if you're sending the PDFs over with the dot loop, quote unquote, signing, that at least makes it easier for that listing agent to easily look at it if they're on the go, because most listing agents are also working with buyers, and we all know that it's hard out here to find, houses for our buyers. So they're on the go. So they're multitasking. And that's one of the reasons why they're asking for that, because it makes their life easier to get that over.
I agree. All right, so let's talk a little bit about comps, and we'll add just a few more notes as we go. As we get through these particular items, I'll talk through some of my experience on the listing side of it as well. So comps are just all over the place. I hope you as a professional is still looking in the system to see what sales are actually taking place and not just throwing things up against the wall to see what sticks. I'm gonna apologize if I'm being really blunt about that, but I will tell you, if you are submitting an offer on a house that's probably not going to appraise for more than $250,000, and you send an offer to a listing agent, and that offer comes across as $300,000, that listing agent is not taking this offer seriously. And neither is that seller, if that listing agent has been giving their good consultation to their sellers. Most sellers have at least a decent idea of what their home is going to appraise for. Now, they may get more than that in this market because people are paying more than what the appraised value is. I totally get all that, but you're still a professional. And part of that means that you need to be submitting a serious offer on behalf of your clients. And that means that you have to do your due diligence when you are making these offers for your clients. Does that make sense to everybody?
Ooh, I will interject on that.
I'll be nice.
I am going to be nice. I am. I don't know why y'all be thinking I'm mean. I'm just straightforward too. Anyway, my seller was very savvy, and we had multiple offers above list price. And she already knew where she felt the appraisal was going to come in. And so when we had offers that were astronomically higher, she was like, I'm not even taking them seriously. I didn't have to say anything to her about that. She made that commentary herself. And then on top of it, they didn't even do any type of guarantee. So when you take out the fact that, hey, you offered me X amount more, but if it comes in where I think it's going to come in, I'm still going to get the same, but I have these other offers over here that guaranteed me some cash, even though they know they made a higher offer than where we think it's going to be, she went to that. So I think what I'm also saying is that you have to be mindful that at the end of the day, it's not just the top line number that an agent sellers are looking at. They're technically really looking at that bottom line number. They're looking at that net. I had a buyer lose out to, and she was a cash deal. They had an offer for $320 with a $5,000 appraisal guarantee and an offer at $305 with a $10,000 appraisal guarantee. Well, they took the $305 offer, which was $30,000 above list price because of that $10,000 guarantee. So just because you inflated the top line number doesn't mean that you're going to get the bid, because they're looking at the bottom line number.
I agree. It just goes to show that you really have to be having really great conversations and educating your sellers. All they see in this market is, this is a hot market. I can get as much money as I possibly can for my house and all of that. And that's true, but there's still limitations to that. So make sure you're setting those right expectations with your clients, whether it's on the buyer side or the seller side. So I'm going to piggyback on what Denise said about comps and guarantees. In this market, your buyers may have to pay more than the appraised value. And I think part of that, I know from me personally, I'm tempering that as much as I possibly can. So don't just throw a number out there to your buyers just because they're willing to pay up to $10,000. It could be that when you look at the comps, which you should be doing, that buffer may only be $5,000, or that buffer could be $2,500. That's a part of our job as professionals to make sure we're doing all of that providing all of that information up front to our buyers. I'm going to go on to the next thing, because the two of these things kind of go together to me, and that is confer with your clients when you're making an offer. Everything right now, houses are flying off the shelf. Take the time to have a buyer's consultation with your clients. Do a Zoom call, do a FaceTime, whatever it looks like virtually, so that you guys can hit the road, to go get inside these doors, get that pre-approval letter, everything that you need. Make sure that you are doing that as quickly as possible, and make sure you're having those conversations with your buyers, that they need to pack their patience, because they may have to submit more than one offer. They may have to submit more than 10 offers in order for them to get to this house. It is just the reality of what we're looking at right now in this market. So make sure you're having buyer consultations. I can't stress that enough on how important that is right now in this market, that you're educating them and providing them with what they need and the tools that they need to make great offers, as well as setting the expectation. Even when you're doing your buyer consultation and they're setting that, and you're signing your buyer brokerage agreement, if you had been doing that for 90 days and that's it, I would encourage you to increase that time frame a little longer, because it could take more than 90 days in this market to find your clients a home, depending on what their financing is. depending on what their cash looks like and how much they may have to bring on a particular house. So I just want to make sure that you're thinking about all of those things, because those things have an impact when you are submitting an offer on a property. Anybody have any comment or question?
Alisa, this is Falonda Shea. I have a question. Can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yes, ma'am.
With this conversation, can you go back to that buffer you were talking about and flesh out what you mean by the buffer when we're consulting at the time of writing the offer?
Okay, so when you're doing for the appraisal gap, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so when I'm looking at a property and looking at what's sold in the neighborhood, looking at how recent properties have come on the market, if there's not a lot of sales in that community, I may advise my clients not, if they're going to make up the gap, because they may have to, try not to go over $5,000, for example. So
Okay.
that's what that buffer is. And so if your client is having to bring that additional money to closing, you should be having that conversation in your buyer's consultation so that they know, expect to have to bring your own closing costs unless there's a down payment assistance or, a cash program that you can take advantage of. And know that it's a possibility that you may have to make up a little bit of a difference if that appraisal comes in less than the contract price. But make sure you're reiterating to them that that difference is based on the contract price, that they're not going to be paying more than what that property is contracted for. Here's an example. I have a contracted price at $275. That appraisal comes in at $260, and my client have a $5,000 guarantee. The max my client is going to pay is going to be $265. So if we have a same contract price of $275, and that appraisal comes in at $273, my client is going to make up that $2,000 difference to make that contract whole.
So you write a cap in the stipulation, you cap it.
Absolutely, not to
Right.
exceed the contract price. That's what I do.
Okay. Gosh, I lost my other question about that. Oh, do you write that, the offer to pay above appraised value in your initial submission, or you wait on on a counter? You wait on them to ask you?
I make that up front. I put that up front in the
Okay.
contract. It's a part of that stipulation, is a part of the contract that I'm submitting. Because here's what I will tell you from the experience that I had. My clients we wanted to go with a cash offer at first, and that cash offer didn't make sense to my clients.
Okay.
Okay. So we ended up looking at the next group of people that she considered was the people that were willing to pay above the list price and give some guarantee. She looked at those people first.
Okay.
Here's where that is a win for your people who are FHA. That makes those people a part of the conversation.
Okay.
Because my seller actually looked at that. That helps make because some agents are saying, don't consider an FHA deal. Unfortunately, that's just happening out here in the market. But you want to have your buyer in the conversation. That is one of the ways that your buyer can be a part of the conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything on that?
I was going to add something. I can't, let me, yeah. So to your question, Falonda Shea,
Yes.
when I reviewed offers this weekend with my seller, two came to the forefront because of the guarantees that they were willing to do above appraised value. I was actually talking to an agent this morning who they apparently went above list price, and the counter that the seller did come back was to guarantee a portion of, if it came in light. So I would say to be part of the conversation, well, let me back up. There's a lot of creative things that agents are doing and buyers and their agents are doing. One of those things is guaranteeing above appraised value. So you just have to determine what is going to be the ideal situation for your client and their situation.
Absolutely.
Because in my case, I had 10 offers, 8 of which were above list price.
Mhm.
And one of them was totally out because they went too far above. And she was like, it's not going to appraise for that. I know what my house is valued for. And she wasn't trying to stiff people. She just wanted what it was worth. And when it came down to it, she wanted me to level set back to the list price with everybody's offer plus any guarantees. And that's how she came up with her decision.
Okay.
Anybody
Again,
else?
it's about that net.
Anybody else have an experience they'd like to share?
Well, I certainly do if someone else doesn't. So my client did offer 10,000 above the appraised value, not to exceed the contracted price. So we did cap it. But the lesson I learned, their appraisal came in below list price. So it's a great win. In terms for my client, it was a good win because she got a great situation. But if I were the listing agent, I would have wanted to protect my list price because I know they didn't anticipate it coming in $11,000 below their list price. And they actually asked us, when we added $10,000, it was now $1,100 short of the list price, maybe like $1,900. It was $1,900 short of the list price with our $10,000 added. And they was like, hey, is your buyer willing to make up even the 1,900? And my buyer was like, no. But if I were the listing agent, I would have wanted to protect at least my list price. I don't know how to write that, but that was a wild lesson that I learned just thinking about it from both sides, even though I represented the buyer.
I think from the listing standpoint, that completely goes back to looking at the comps.
Okay.
I think that goes back to looking at the comps and doing your due diligence. And sometimes, in this market, because it's so all over the place, confer with another agent, have a conversation with another agent, with someone who may be a little bit more experienced, or somebody who can just be objective about what your situation is with that seller, especially if you know that it's going to be tight. It can't hurt to have another conversation because they can give you another point of view to avoid that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I think, what I told my 2 sellers that I'm working with, in one case, I think we're pushing the envelope a little bit. And in the other case, I think we're on point. But to that point, what you're saying is, and I have another one that I'm looking at now, and I said, hey, what we don't want to happen is we want to price it right. We don't want to price it higher because we think that's what we're going to get. You need to price it accordingly based on the comps and let the market push it up.
Absolutely.
Don't push it up and then think the market is going to, respond to that, because another agent contacted me who said that her client loved this house. House was listed at like 210 or 220, and they put in an offer at 180 because they thought it was overpriced. And my question to her was, did you contact the agent to find out about the comps? Well, when she finally did contact that agent, the agent said, well, in this market, blah, 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 blah. So he priced it to what he thought the market was going to give him. So he ended up sitting on the market longer than he probably should have. And they did come to an agreement, because that's the other thing now as a listing agent. If you start pricing it where you think it's going to come in at and you're sitting, then you're giving a message to buyers and sellers like, well, what's wrong with this house?
Right.
Because it's sitting on the market. But if you price it right, let the market drive it up, let the appraisal level it out, and you can potentially get a guarantee or not. you know, that's where you really need to do, but don't overprice it. And that's probably what happened there, that they got a little, you know, ahead of themselves with that. But like the ones that I know that we're pushing the envelope a little bit, I've given them a range and I've said, hey, I know we're pushing the envelope, but we don't want to push it too far because we don't want to have to bring that price down in the system, because then now we look different to everybody.
Exactly. And that's all about setting an expectation with your client, whether it is the buyer or the seller. Okay, so let's go on. So we'll just talk for those people who are brand new. We'll talk a little bit about financing. FHA is 3%, 3.5% down. Seller can pay up to 6% concessions. I will tell you, in this market, if you've got an FHA buyer, unless you can get them qualified for a down payment assistance program that the seller is willing to accept, you need to be preparing your clients to bring that prepare your buyers that they're going to have to bring some closing costs along with their down payment. Again, that all goes back to setting the expectation. Let's hope that that's not the case, but make sure that you're having that conversation with them when you're doing your buyer's consultation. That is why that is so important.
I'm sorry, this is Giselle. Can you repeat that? You said they'll have to bring up their closing costs up to, you said 6%?
It can be. The seller can pay up to 6% on an FHA loan of the closing costs, prepaids, escrows, or the escrows, taxes, insurance. The seller is allowed, based on FHA rules, to pay up to 6%. But what I'm saying is, in this market, sellers understand that they don't have to pay closing costs if they're getting multiple offers, that's not something that they have to do. So when you're having your buyer's consultation, make sure you're setting the expectation with your buyer to let them know that, hey, you know, the seller may or may not pay, you know, some of the closing costs unless you've got a down payment assistance program that seller is willing to accept when they receive your offer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, so VA financing is 100% financing. Seller can pay all of the closing costs. VA also requires that the seller provides a termite letter. The seller has to provide it and not the buyer. So that is something that you need to consider, you know, when you're working on those types of offers, but find ways to get around that cost. Okay, don't let your buyer miss out on a termite letter, you know, a potential termite letter, or a newer house, for example, that may not have a termite problem, or it's a recently purchased house. I mean, ask the agent whether or not the seller has a service where it can be transferred, and it just makes it easy for your buyer to be able to maneuver in the market. Have those conversations with the listing agent.
Alisa,
Yes, ma'am.
can we go back to FHA for a moment?
Sure.
If they have the 3.5%, or maybe even not all of it,
Mm-hmm.
and we are at FHA, sometimes that's just where we are.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Just where we are. How can we be creative and get the attention, if possible, of the listing agent?
Well, it goes back to, you know, is your buyer in a position where they can bridge some of that gap?
Okay.
That it's about making sure that that buyer is a part of the conversation. And to Denise's point, those kinds of things make a difference to the bottom line, because they may have, you know, 10 other conventional buyers, and none of those conventional buyers are willing to, you know, make up the difference in the appraisal. But your FHA person says, okay, we can do that. We'll give you $10,000 over if it doesn't come in. at the amount. So from a bottom line number, that's going to make sense to that seller, and that makes that offer very competitive. You want your seller your buyer to be a part of the conversation when they're making the decision. Because here's the thing, I got out of that listing that I had that had over 80 offers on it, to a certain point, those offers just look the same, right? They look the same. How are you going to differentiate yourself? And that's one of the ways that you can do that, because at that point, that becomes about the math. If there's 80 offers and I'm looking at, I've got 10 people who are willing to make up the difference in the appraisal, then it's just a matter of calculating the difference between what they're willing to come up with in that difference. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
And
you want to make sure you're part, because sellers do have negative connotations, unfortunately, about FHA or VA even. We want to make sure that we're making sure they are a part of the conversation, and that's how we get them considered.
okay, to that point, with those gazillion offers, are
Right.
those emails with PDFs, or did you use the link in command, the
So
shortcut?
I did not, because I haven't used that before. I have a spreadsheet, a multiple offer spreadsheet that I use. And so
Oh,
I entered all of that detail into the spreadsheet with the specifics of what they were asking for stipulation wise and what differentiated. So this might be a good time to talk about escalation clauses.
okay.
I had a couple of agents call me and ask me personally, how do you feel about escalation clauses? Okay. And because that listing agent is the gatekeeper, because I thought it was interesting that he asked me what did I think, not what the seller thought about escalation clauses. If that listing agent have a negative thought about escalation clauses, that could impact your offer. And not necessarily in a good way, because here's the thing. The escalation clauses that we saw in some of the offers only escalated in price, but it wasn't the best offer when it came to the due diligence period, and wasn't the best offer when it came to the financing contingency and when the appraisal could be done. So it's not just the price. It's still also the terms. If you send me an offer that had that if we implemented your escalation clause and you got and it got you over the top, but you're asking the seller for a 10-day due diligence period. Well, there's another offer that because of your escalation clause, you exceeded them by, $2,000, but this person can get the due diligence done in 4 days. That seller is not on pins and needles, wondering about whether or not their house is going to make the inspection is going to be okay. So you've still got to have really good terms, because it's not just about the price that, a savvy person is looking for. I had a recent listing down in Fayetteville. It was an estate property. They had no connection, no emotional attachment to that property whatsoever. And their opinion was, well, why do they need an escalation clause? Why do they just not submit their best offer? So it just depends on who that offer is in front of. It depends on what that listing agent, who is the gatekeeper for that seller, thinks about escalation clauses. And I'm not saying use it one way or another. I'm just telling you based on what my experience was in the past 30 days, what that connotation was. And like I said, I was really struck that he wanted to know what my opinion of it was, not the seller. Because at the end of the day, the seller picks the offer. The seller accepts the offer. Agents don't accept offers. Okay. So conventional offers, obviously, if you've got a conventional buyer and their appraisal is supposedly not quite as strict. Those are typically the ones that are being looked at from the listing agent standpoint, if they don't have a cash offer. Those are typically the ones of choice. That is why it's so important to be having those conversations in your buyer consultations with your clients who are FHA, and they can only go FHA. Everybody can't go conventional. It's just the reality of what we live in. Okay. I have a qualified $400,000 buyer who can't get anything accepted because she's an FHA buyer, in my opinion, at that price point. And she can't go conventional. So we have to work with what we have. And so that's why it's so important to make sure your offers are being as creative as possible. You're being as creative as possible with your offers so that you can make your client a part of the conversation. Anybody have any feedback?
Are you saying that that FHA buyer, you said she was approved for 400, you're saying she's not going to be able to get at that price point? Like
Not
she
at
is?
all. Just that it's hard for her. She's competing with so many conventional buyers.
Gotcha.
That it's just a challenge.
So was she able to, she qualified for 400. So is she looking at that price point, or is she looking for anything less, or is it just because it's an FHA loan?
We believe it's because it's an FHA loan. And I'll talk about this, and this might even be a good time to talk about it. If you have a lender that can do to be determined underwriting, meaning your buyer can be fully underwritten in front of an underwriter, and you can get a loan commitment, and you're just looking at conditions and a few conditions and the appraisal and the title and a contract, that's going to help your FHA buyer as well. So make sure you're asking your lender partners and having those conversations up front as to whether or not they have the ability to do the to be determined underwriting. So now we are now a part of the conversation. We had an offer that we didn't get, but the listing agent called me because we had a loan commitment. We're willing to make up some of the difference in the appraisal. She called me and said, hey, if your buyer is interested in this property, I need you to send me a written backup. Okay. And that it was, at that $400,000 range, but it made them a part of the conversation, and it made them competitive, and it put them in the top 2 because she reached out to me to say, basically your offer was strong enough, and if this falls through, we know that your buyer can close because they've already been fully underwritten. So when I'm submitting an offer for them now, I don't have to ask for a financing contingency. I can waive that because my client has already been approved.
Wow.
Okay. So you've got to think about those things, especially with your FHA buyers. Those things make your clients a part of the conversation. Now, the seller may still need 30 days to close, or they're moving to another property that is new construction, so they need those extra days. So when I send my offer, I send an email to the listing agent and I say, hey, we can close. My buyer is able to close in 18 days, 18 to 20 days, according to the lender. But if your seller needs some extra time, my client is flexible. Make yourself easy to work with and get yourself a part of the conversation. Does that make sense? Any feedback to those ideas? Okay. So cash offers can be hard to compete with, but maybe not. It depends on the priorities of the sellers. In prior markets, the thought has always been cash is king. That's not always the case. Not every seller, needs to close in 21 days. They certainly are not accepting in this market less than the list price, which they would have been able to do maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago. That's just not the market we're in. Okay. So don't make your buyers as competitive as possible, even against cash offers. Now, if you've got a cash offer that has waived all of the contingency, waived all of the appraisal, don't want to do diligence, it's going to be hard to compete with that. And unfortunately, that kind of is what it is. And I've had that, where that was the case with one of my listings. It was a cash offer. It was $15,000 over the list price. There was no appraisal contingency, no financing contingency, no due diligence. It was, I want this house.
And y'all accepted it and closed on it?
They accepted it.
Okay.
But not more because of the terms as opposed to the price, because we had people who were willing to pay more, people who were willing to come up with some of the difference, but they didn't have to go through any type of contingencies at all.
Okay.
And in that instance, it was just a better situation for the seller. Now, if that cash offer had said, well, we want to have an appraisal, then they may have looked at other offers. Because there wasn't a gap, in between of what they were willing to make, a gap of what they were willing to make to bridge the gap to the appraisal. We just didn't have that as an issue. And that's a favorable turn to a seller. It was basically get the title work done and we can pick the closing date. So some sellers definitely are looking for the path of least resistance. If you've got an FHA client or a conventional client that has been fully underwritten and can still close as fast as that cash buyer that may want due diligence or may want an appraisal, why would those people not be considered if everything else is equal?
I will add with the appraisal, waiving the appraisal contingency.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're waiving it and it comes in lower, you're basically losing your right to negotiate.
Yeah.
If it comes in lower.
Right.
So your clients need to be prepared to pay that cash difference if needed.
Right. And if they've put up a hefty earnest money, $5,000 to $6,000 in earnest money, is like, well, I don't, we submitted the offer, but we don't have enough money to pay a $30,000 shortfall. Your buyer's earnest money is gone, because that appraisal contingency has been waived. You have no leverage based on the way that contract was written and accepted. So please be mindful of that. Make sure that you're working in your client's best interest and protecting their interest as well as their money. Okay. Timing, response time. If you have a property that has gone on, if you're seeing a property that has gone on the market and there's a lot of activity on that property, I would encourage you to give the listing agent some time to respond. Okay. It's so important. And if that agent, like me, for example, I looked at almost 80 offers. Even if it's not that many, I had one where there was 17 offers. Give the agent enough time. If they have requested highest and best by 5 o'clock on Sunday, Denise, you need to mute. If you've got a buyer that if there was a line of people there and they've called for highest and best at 5 o'clock for you to get your offers in, please don't call the listing agent at 6 o'clock and ask them, have the seller made a decision yet? Because they probably haven't. They probably haven't had an opportunity to review all of the offers that have come in. Those kinds of things will make the listing agent think that you're difficult to work with, and that can get relayed to the seller if they have some influence. Give the listing agent time to work. So give them a reasonable amount of time when you're setting that time on your contracts on the first page at the bottom. Anything on that? Okay. Due diligence. When you're submitting these offers and you need a specific amount of time when you're asking for a specific amount of time on your due diligence, make sure you have your core team available and on board. If you can do a 4-day due diligence, you should have an appraisal that you should be able to pick up and call and say, hey, can you go do this appraisal on this day? I mean, this home inspection on this day. If you've got somebody who's doing that you work with that can do pest control or termite or whatever the case may be, make sure you have those people already, on standby if you receive that offer.
Ooh, can I add on the due diligence commentary?
Sure.
So that is truly important, in terms of how much time, because I had somebody put in an offer with the right, the RRR, whatever, reserve the right to respect repairs or whatever that's called. And because I wasn't as familiar with it, I sent that straight over to Stephen to provide some clarity for me. And the first thing he said is like, these people are tying your house up for 14 days. So although it sounds real great to, say you're just going to do an inspection and then reserve the right to repair, and then in the special steps, they were still trying to protect the earnest money, and that form doesn't technically protect the earnest money. So in essence, in my mind, she was asking for a 14-day due diligence. She was better off asking me for a 7-day due diligence, because I could have worked with that better than this, 14 days you want to keep my house off the market, versus that. So if you're going to use that right to reserve too, make sure you truly understand what that document is. And I know they touched on it on the broker boy call this month, because I came in at the tail end of the conversation. Mm-hmm. So if you're not familiar with that form, touch base with somebody else who might be more familiar with it, or Stephen or any of the other brokers, before you start using that form, because that person kind of got eliminated just because it was 14 days and everybody else was like at 7 or under. So just make sure you're doing what you can do and that it's reasonable, and have, if you need to have conversations with the listing agent, like, again, somebody called me actually today. Her client is relocating from Wisconsin. They wanted to give her a 4-day due diligence. She asked them for 5, and she's like, hey, my clients aren't even local. Can I get this extra day? And they gave it to her. So, just make sure you can come with the rationale if you need to, and things like that. So.
Thank you. I agree with that. All of that. Anybody have any feedback or any other feedback on the due diligence piece? Because the last thing you want to do in this market is to have to go back to that listing agent and ask them for more time.
Yeah, I have a question. So for that due diligence, you mentioned like having your core team. When I think of the core team, I guess I think of like appraisal, and home inspections, and then you said like termite. We need that. But what are some other people that might be needed for that due diligence?
Those are the main ones. If there's somebody who, if your buyer is buying a house that has a pool and you want that pool to be inspected, then you definitely want to include that person as well. If you suspected that there was mold in the house, you want to make sure that that can be inspected as well. You want to get all of that done within the amount of time that you've asked for that due diligence, and have enough time for that information to be sent to the seller, and that it gets negotiated before the end of that due diligence period.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Septic would be another.
Septic,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, that's true.
I don't remember what I put a list together actually, that I now send to my buyers, especially, that kind of just list everything, because different things come up.
Okay.
You know, radon, if it's a basement, especially, you might want to do that.
Mhm.
I had one that had readings up to 16 and the average was 7. So, but that's something most home inspectors can also do. So
True.
you can kind of do that on the upfront, but you need 2 days for that test. That's a
Right.
2-day turnaround test. So if you're going to do a radon, just make sure you have enough time for that 48 hours. And actually, you know, to that point of giving the agent time to do it, you got to give the inspector time to get back over there too, right?
Right.
To get the device, but that radon can be important.
True. And for those of you who are on the call and don't know, Denise teaches the amendments to address concerns class. So that's certainly something you don't want to miss. She's really proficient at that. Financing contingency and appraisal contingency, again, they knowing what your client's situation is, everybody's is different. If you can make sure that you can't do a lot about the appraisal because the lender is going to control that. Don't put your buyer in a position with a 10-day appraisal contingency, because you as the agent can't promise that. Make sure you're having that conversation with the lender on how long it can take. They can request a rush, doesn't mean that they get it, but they can request a rush on your behalf. Again, make sure you're having conversations when you're submitting offers with your lender partner, with all of your partners that are on your team. When I'm submitting an offer, I call my lender and say, hey, how if they don't offer, for example, I have one that doesn't offer to be determined underwriting, but I call and ask, do you have all of their documents? Have they turned in all of their stuff? Do you just need the contract? And if the answer is yes, okay, how long is it taking for you guys to underwrite? Is it taking you, are you guys on a 4-day or a 5-day turnaround? And that 4-day to 5-day doesn't necessarily include the weekend. So you want to make sure that you are having those conversations with your lender partners when you're setting that financing contingency. Again, the last thing you want to do is to have to go back to that listing agent and ask for that additional time, because you may or may not get it. Philonda Shay, did you have something?
Can you hear me?
You're muted.
Alisa, can you hear me now?
I can now.
So with the finance and contingency and appraisal contingency, how do you run those days? So if you ask for 15 days finance, do you automatically ask for 15 days appraisal? Or do you do one number greater than the other? And if so, why?
I'm sorry, I could barely hear you.
Hold on, my phone been jumping off the hook, that's why. Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Finance and appraisal contingency, those number of days. Let's say you did finance 15 days or whatever. Do you automatically do appraisal the same number of days, or do you make it more or less, or why and why?
It just depends. If I have a client who doesn't offer to, lender doesn't offer to be determined, they've turned in all of their paperwork, they're just waiting on me. If I call my lender partner and say, you know, how long is it going to take? They may say, I should be able to get an answer within 10 days. So my financing contingency may be 10 days. I was like, okay, so what are you seeing that it's taking for an appraisal, for the appraisal to be completed? And they may come back and say, hey, the appraisal you know, we requested some rush and, you know, we might need a whole 18 days or 20 days in order to get it back because appraisals are backed up. They're going to know that information. Those numbers don't have to be the same, but that's only for a conventional loan or for a cash buyer that wants to have it. For FHA and VA, you don't have that control. Whenever it comes back, that's when it comes back.
Do you have a preference of how soon you want them to order that appraisal? Do you wait till after?
Well, one, you mean the lender?
Yeah, when do you prefer the lender order it?
Well, I guess it just depends on what that lender's process is. Because if you're on the under the gun and they're just waiting for you to get the contract, you get it, you know, get the contract tonight for tomorrow, then what you just need to do is say, hey, I'm sending you the contract tonight. Can y'all go ahead and get it done? Find out what their process is. How soon can their assistant or, you know, their processor get all of that stuff compiled and submitted? Again, that's just about having the conversation with your lender. They can provide you with, you know, a pretty accurate timeline of how things are happening in their company. Anybody else? Okay. So just other things to consider. I know we're running just over. Other things to consider is a closing attorney, the closing date and the possession date. With the closing attorney, technically it's the buyer's choice who the closing attorney should be. But if you want to be agreeable and get your contract accepted, you might need to go with that listing agent's attorney. Okay, but it is always the buyer's choice. When they fill out their mortgage application, there's a form in there that asks them, did they select their closing attorney? Okay, but if they need to be agreeable and you want that contract accepted, you may need to use the one that the listing agent recommended. Now there's a couple of advantages to that. One, it may be a property that they closed prior and the title work had some issues and they were able to work through those issues, and they've also issued an owner's policy on it. That's a good reason to use, especially when you have renovations or estate sales, estate properties. That's a great reason to use the attorney that the listing agent has recommended, because they've already done that background research on the title for that property. Okay, as far as the closing date, you know, just think about what flexibility you have, as well as how flexible you can be to the seller when you're trying to have these offered, get your offer accepted. Second, and the last thing is the possession date. As in the example of my client, they can close in 18 days and they can move the day of closing. But if you've got some flexibility, a temporary occupancy may be an alternative. Moving the closing date is also an alternative. So just make sure you're using all of those tools when you're working to get that closing date. Okay. So that's all I got. Anybody have any questions, any feedback, anything that we didn't cover in this class?
Listen, can you hear me?
I can.
I've taken this class every time you've taught it since I've been here, and I always learn something. I tell you the truth. Between this class and Denise's class on special stipulations and the amendment to address concerns, these are the most readily used tools in my toolkit of the classes we teach. And I just, every time I'm on,
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Anybody else have any feedback? Anything that we did not cover in this class? Anything that you think that I need to be?
I learned a lot today. This is Giselle. I learned a lot today. I'm still fairly new to real estate, so this was very helpful for me as far as representing buyers. I have actually a buyer's consult form, so every time you reference that, that was very helpful. So I will practice on that. But so my only other question, well, my only question right now is creating the contract. I haven't taken a contract class yet, so I guess that's where I'm kind of stuck on. All this information is great for what's in the contract, or I mean, not the contract, the offer. Creating the offer is great. All this information was that, but like, how do I go about creating that? With the, I heard you say something about the PDF, and then looking at like what the listing agent asked for an MLS or whatever they're posted on. So how would I go about that?
If there's not an upcoming contracts class, there are the ALC members are a great resource. I'm happy to assist you with writing an offer if need be. There's so many resources in this office. There are so many people in this office who are willing to share, their knowledge and provide. Just reach out to somebody. The leadership in the office, Deanna or Casey or Dawn, can always put you into contact with somebody who can help you write a contract.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Hey, Alisa, I got a quick question. That the multiple offer spreadsheet, I think we talked about that in the past. You know where I can get one of those?
I don't know. I'm happy to share mine with you. If you'd like, if you just want to email me your email me and ask me for it, put in the subject line, and I'm happy to share it with you.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Anybody else?
Yes, I'll be doing that as well. I did have a question this morning that in my night class that wasn't really answered. I was asking kind of, when you have, like you said, you had 80 offers, how do you present 80 offers to your client? Do you just give them the spread, you put it on the spreadsheet and then you go over it in the spreadsheet, or do you kind of like put the offers that you think are the best at the top, and kind of how does that discussion go?
So the way that I did it is, the way I do it is I put it on the spreadsheet, and I know when I save those offers, for me personally, my process is, and it's important that you figure out what your process is and going to be, and it's a learning process. Trust me, I had to learn. But the way that I do it is I number, when I save each offer to go back to review it, to put on the spreadsheet, every offer, I save it as a number. And that way, if they have a question about the detail for offer number 13, I can go to offer number 13 and I can send that one to them when we're having the conversation, so that they can physically lay eyes on it. Because again, if you're looking at 80 offers, a lot of them will start to look the same. The net number looks the same. The things that they're requesting all look the same as well. But we are required to present any offers that we get on a property. And when I'm using that spreadsheet, I'm presenting to them all of the offers with all of the detail objectively. It's just me providing the data. Does that answer?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you just provide all the data and then it's kind of like an open discussion.
It is.
Okay.
It's an open discussion. My client asked me, which ones do you recommend?
Okay.
So what I did is I said, okay, let's start with the net number. Okay, these give you the highest net. And after we talked through those, then it didn't satisfy all of their needs with the terms and all of that. So then the next one is, okay, if we don't make the value, and then of course with the net number, what's going to be a realistic, what was a number that they just threw out there that hit the, that they threw out just to see what's stuck on the wall. So it became a process of elimination, and then what we had left didn't quite satisfy what they were looking for. So then we go and look at, okay, so, who's willing to make up the difference? in the appraisal and how much. And so we look at what their contract price was, what their net number was, and if that whatever they were willing to pay in the difference in the guarantee, then this is what we added to their net number. And so they tried as much as possible because they were savvy. She has a sister that's also a realtor in another state. So she knows the challenges of buyers. So she tried not to look at what their financing was, but she's a savvy buyer and a savvy seller, and not everyone is like that. So I think that's going to depend. That's going to make a difference as well when you're having that conversation. Does that make sense? I felt like I was a little rambling.
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense, but it sounds like that's like the perfect client.
Right.
And that, I'm not gonna be like that.
Right. So I think you need to, once you know what the priority is of your seller, use that as your guide. And if the offers that you've identified that meet all of those needs, the needs that they say they had is not there, then go on to another category. Okay, let's see who can close the fastest. Let's see who can bridge the gap, things like that. Who doesn't need additional days for due diligence so that you're not holding your house off the market. So have a list of criteria kind of already in your mind based on what your seller has already said was their motivation.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Alisa, are you okay if I put your email in the chat so folks can request that list?
Absolutely, that's fine. And again, I think we're a little bit over, so I'm going to apologize and respect your time. If you need to jump off, I totally understand.
Thank you so much. This was very helpful.
You're welcome. We do try to do it every month, don't we, Deanna? She is muted.
She
Sorry,
might be in another call.
my computer's dying, so I had to I had to do a lot of trick things. Yeah, we usually have it once a quarter.
Okay.
And we're trying to stick to that, or as needed as new agents come in, but try to stick to once a quarter because I know your schedule's pretty hectic out there in the field.
Okay. All right. Anybody else before we end it? Okay. Well, good luck, everybody out there. Go sell tons and tons of houses. I hope this information is helpful, and I hope you can use some of these tools and ideas to win all of those offers.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.